That seems fair to me.
Fairness isn't the
really
issue.
think
If
you're
anything,
Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make a judgment on what fair is.
Unacceptable by any reason. Standards you can't.
Donnybrook is made possible through the generous support of the members of KETC.
So thanks for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us, and thanks to our friends at the Gatesworth. 29 years in running for making this program possible, as you do week in and week out. Let's welcome back to our broadcast Wendy Wiese, who took a week off, and we're glad to have the media veteran back. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, along with Mr. Ray Hartmann from St. Louis Magazine. He's Alvin Reid from STLmag.com, excuse me, Ray, and the St. Louis American. I got that right. I've only said it 300 times the last 6 years or whatever.
It's been a befuddling week, John.
I was thinking about the great wedding last weekend when Maggie and Jacob walked down the aisle, and what a... I'm glad. I bet you're glad, Wendy, you have that behind you. Even as beautiful a day as it was, it's nice to have it over, right?
I was telling you on the way in from the parking lot, the only thing weirder than the week before your daughter's wedding is the week after your daughter. I'm totally lost. I feel like I should be calling somebody, but thank you all for being there and for dancing. You were fantastic.
that was not me.
Bill was putting on a dancing clinic. Yeah, he was showing everybody.
You did very well. Dr. McClellan was marvelous. She was fantastic. It was a great evening, and we're just really happy.
Jacob and Maggie, a beautiful couple, and that brings us, actually, it doesn't bring us at all to anything here.
No, it doesn't. You're going to make me cry again.
Hey, let's talk about what was an amazing revelation, because we know in Jefferson City, after the Special Legislative Committee took a look at the allegations surrounding Eric Greitens, in the first report, the husband of the illicit lover at the center of attention with Eric Greitens said that after he broke the story by releasing the audio tape in January, there was a fund set up at the lawyer's office to help him with the legal bills. It was rather mysterious. And then about 2 weeks ago, the lawyer himself, Albert Watkins, said he got two $50,000 payments. Everyone was wondering, well, who gave this money? And then Jim Martin, an attorney for Eric Greitens, this week said one payment was $50,000 in cash from Scott Fawn, a former panelist on Donnybrook here and the publisher of the Missouri Times and a frequent contributor to KMOX Radio. So what did you think about that, Wendy Wiese?
I almost fell off the couch. I seriously almost fell off the couch. I could not believe it when I read that. And at the same time, Scott is somebody who, I mean, anybody who's ever met him or been in the same room with him, he is larger than life. I mean, he really is. He is enthusiastic. He looks like one of those people who probably, gets by on about an hour and a half of sleep a night. He knows everybody, knows everything that's going on. But when you are the publisher of a newspaper, as he is, and when you are the managing editor of a television show, as he is, you cannot, so you're operating in the world of journalism. So in my mind and in the minds of many people, you forfeit your right to operate in the world of activism. So he is going to have to, I think as much as I like him, and I like him, anybody who's met him I'm sure likes him, with the exception of the governor, who probably doesn't like him very much. I think you even people who like and support him would agree that he's got to be one or the other.
No, I wouldn't.
Really?
I think it's a hybrid. I mean, when you're in Jefferson City and running a paper that the Republicans had started, it's sort of a quasi-journalism thing. And one of the great things about Scott, like when he's on Donnybrook, for instance, is he has so many insights into the Republicans that the rest of us don't have, because they talk frankly with him. He's one of them. And so, I mean, Scott's always been kind of a quasi-journalist, I think.
Okay.
Well, but I don't think, like Wendy said, maybe that's part of the problem that journalism has right now, is that we got too many quasi-journalists running out there, and too many of them take themselves very seriously. Now, I think Scott crossed the line, but he's a player. Okay, and he doesn't hide that, and he also never hid his disdain for the governor of the state of Missouri. And it always seemed like it was more so than just, I don't like his politics, or it really, he just didn't hide that. But you can't, I don't think you can help subterfuge the guy in the name of journalism, or I guess because he says he was writing a book, which I'm sorry, I don't buy that. But I just, you got to draw a line to protect journalism. I'm usually that guy trying to draw the hardest of lines, and so this is one this is way beyond what a publisher of a publisher of publication should do.
Scott Farn, who is a friend, and so I biased a little. He's not a quasi-journalist. He would argue that he's not a journalist at all. Scott thinks of himself as a businessman and a player and I wouldn't call him an activist, but he's a political player. And he is a very much so, maybe the most connected person I think I've ever met when it comes to Jefferson City politics. And he's definitely he doesn't want to be considered a journalist.
Right.
And it is the sad state of our affairs and he's a pundit, really, and that all the lines are blurred, whether it's here or in Washington, whatever. But I think the question I have is I'm not quite sure why the $100,000, while it's really interesting and feels kind of smarmy, I don't understand what real relevance it has to whether to the questions of Greitens. Because now let me say, if the $100,000 had been paid to the woman who was involved in this story, very definitely that would be a story. But whether
I'll explain to you, Ray.
Whether you think Greitens is fit or not
because
is
you're wrong.
unaffected by the $100,000.
I'll explain that, but honestly, Ray, I think you're wrong because he is a member of the Professional Journalist Societies in St. Louis and Jeff City. He gets parking in Jeff City for journalists, and his paper does. He is always introduced as the publisher of the Missouri Times, the Clayton Times, the SEMO Times, and the host of Missouri Week in Review. And for him not to disclose while he's opining, and he's on our radio program analyzing the governor, but not telling everybody, our listeners, that behind the scenes, he is actually funding the attorney who's driving this thing. As Jim Martin, the attorney for the governor, has said, he might be getting the money from the LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit community, which would be a huge conflict of interest, and to not disclose that is completely unethical.
He would disagree, and I know you don't accept it, but he says he was doing it for his book, and he is doing a book.
Now, when was the last time anyone paid a lawyer in cash, and when was the last time an author paid
I'm just telling you what he said.
any
I'm just
money
saying
whatsoever
he doesn't
in advance?
accept your premise, is all I'm saying. I don't know.
Of course he doesn't.
I don't know.
Because I've got the
When you
truth.
talk about the blurring in journalism, there's a lot of people who are quasi-journalists, but I don't think the lines are blurred like certain, like newspapers are not real newspapers are not doing that. The Missouri Times, I never considered as a real newspaper.
Who's to know? Who's to know?
But you're one of the foremost journalists in this country, and I know that you would not agree with that, but you are. In the minds of many people, you've got an insight about this kind of thing that other people don't. When they see him, as Charlie said, as the publisher of the Missouri Times, they're putting him on a level with Mr. Pulitzer, believe it or not. They're thinking that he's...
And a publisher can lead a cause. I mean, if he wanted to raise money for the legal fees, that's fine, like Colonel McCormick of the Tribune raised money to name O'Hare Airport, but he should have done it publicly as opposed to behind the scenes.
And he was also discussing where the money came from on KMOX when he knew where the money came from. And I said, like, man, that's... Boy, I tell you what, you're having a...
I didn't know he was doing that. Yeah. I will say this. I don't know when you decided being a publisher was considered a particularly respectable thing.
It is a respectable thing.
I haven't heard it. But I actually think my whole point is that, again, I just don't... It's an interesting fixation. I can understand why the defense team is all over it, but I don't think it's material to Eric. Why?
Because
what does it got to do with Eric Greitens?
Because the whole thing, as you remember, the alleged victim at the center of this never filed a police report, never complained. It was driven, perhaps, by the LIHTC community, which is trying to get the governor out of office.
And remember when they were saying Roy Temple, his name got thrown out there? I think that's one reason where the judge is saying, now, wait a minute now. It is important to find out where this money came from because there's a lot of people's names being disparaged that could end up testifying in this courtroom in this case. Did you tell this woman to lie?
And
did
then
you tell?
Ray-
You know,
and Ray-
there's a
People
lot of
should know
questions.
what unholy alliances there
I
are.
agree.
Exactly. And
I
this is
agree.
why
That has
if
nothing
you
to do
are
with the
in
criminal
that
case.
position, you have to stay away from that third rail, because when you become part of the story that is, that is unfolding, then you affect the outcome. And we don't really always have maybe a just outcome. Who knows?
Again, if this was paid to the woman or to Kim Gardner or something, it'd be one thing. There's a criminal case. The criminal case is not affected by this payment.
Right,
It's
but people want to know who's financing stuff.
But they're not financing the criminal case.
No one's saying that this is material to whether or not what
That's all I'm
Crichton's did with
saying.
is having an affair.
That's
but
right.
people want to know who's financing.
Well, wait.
My
no,
point is
let me-
the
I can
other
tie
way
it
around.
up.
Can affect.
I can tie it up real
Okay,
quick.
but
In a way.
the
This
criminal
is why.
case is not affected
No,
by
no,
this.
no.
It, it could affect the witness,
If you-
number 3, the
if you-
ex-husband, if his legal bills are being
There
paid
you
for.
go. That's where I was going.
Then it
If you
affects
find
the
out
outcome.
that money was given to the husband to either hire the attorney, they just gave him the money, right, okay, and that impacted the woman, okay, in any kind of way, then in the jury, you bring that out and say, like, this money came from people that needed this kind of testimony, and it taints her as a witness, and that
And it
is part
impacts
of
the
the criminal trial.
I did not say that it would not have an impact in the criminal trial. What I'm saying is the question for the people of Missouri that matters, and I don't happen to think he's getting convicted. My whole point is this, that the question of whether he's fit or not fit is unaffected by this, and that's the only thing that ought to matter.
But
to
the
both.
trial-
That's
Let's
all I
move on
think.
to the next topic, because we.
And I don't think he's going to get convicted.
I don't
in
either,
any
but-
way.
I'm sure
But
some
I-
of our.
I think this is material.
I'm
in
sure
the trial.
people will have opinions on
Sure.
this on your turn, and I think Ray, you and Wendy will be taking those phone calls later.
will.
I want to ask you about that 23-page report that came out yesterday. It was the second one in 2 months by the Special Legislative Committee that's looking into the allegations surrounding the governor. This time, it took a look at his campaign's use of the donor list. Those who gave more than $1,000 to the Mission Continues, the 501c3 started by the governor in 2007. And he had said in a written statement that the list came from Danny Laub. But instead, an operative, instead people are testifying there seems to be some written evidence that the governor himself got it. One for holiday cards, another time when he was going to tell people, hey, I'm transitioning and here I'm going to write you a letter telling people that things are smooth. And the other aspect of this case, which I think is interesting, he started the campaign and paid associates before he officially declared that he was running for office, and that violates certain election rules. So don't you think that this, even more than the hairdresser scandal, is what could really hurt Eric Greitens?
Well, the cumulative effect is yes. I mean, I think that if this were the only thing he was being charged with, no, I don't think it would rise to any level particularly. I actually waded through the whole thing, and I was struck by the fact that his executive assistant, I think it was, and 2 or 3 other pretty key former, employees were really rolling over on him, and it kind of reminds me of the stuff going on in Washington about loyalty. It was just incredible to read him being called out as a liar by his employees or former employees. And so that's what struck me about it. I would think that it's one of those things where the cover-up is more important than the crime. Because as governor, as opposed to whatever happened in 2015, if the allegations are true, he went to some lengths to cover up and lie about them, if they're true, in 2017 when he was governor. So I think there's a timing problem for him. I think it's mainly the effect of these multiple charges, combined with the fact that we all know his party wants him out, most of his party wants him out of office.
Well, I thought it was weird that his attorney now is Catherine Hanaway, the woman he ran against in 2016.
Right.
And I will say this, if using an office copier, a state office copier, for campaign purposes was enough to bounce William Webster, the Attorney General for the state of Missouri, I think this could be enough to get rid of the governor if people want to do that.
Well, you remember with William Webster, I mean, it was that whole second injury fund, a lot of money changing hands, and that was the only thing that they could get him on that he would plead guilty to. This is a little different. You had Ed Dowd, one of his attorneys, saying, what's the big deal here? This is a charity he started, and so he's using the names. And I think, well, okay, but it's the governor, always something, and one of his people, Michael Hafner, who was a consultant, saying that, the governor had made clear way back in the beginning that we're going to be keeping donors anonymous, and then the Kansas City Star story quoted the governor sometime after that talking about how his key thing is transparency, especially with donors. And you think, why would you even say that? I mean, that the governor, he just says things that he doesn't need to say.
And can
that you look back on and go, why?
And when you say the line, when the truth will suffice, but can we drop the partisan witch hunt rhetoric now?
Yeah.
Because this man's
Yeah.
problems
No kidding.
are not with the circuit attorney in the city of St.
No.
Louis. Now, you can say what you want to about this criminal trial, but something happened, okay? We don't know what, but something happened. It has come to that. He may be found not
He's
guilty,
the only one saying that.
whatever, but,
even if you have the best of intentions, and I'm not saying that that's what was going on here, even if you have the best of intentions with a setting up a charitable foundation, if you later are hiding behind that charitable foundation, for your own political gain and using that charitable foundation for your own political gain, that's it.
Well,
In
I
my
will say-
opinion.
And you're risking the 501c3 status of that,
Which is
and he
They know it.
signed,
something the
he had
Internal
very
Revenue
clear,
Service
he
takes
signed
very
very
seriously.
clear agreements that he knew what he was signing, not
Non-disclosure.
to do this,
Yeah.
non-disclosure. He signed those. And according to his own aides,
Yep.
he as
Yeah.
a pattern did this.
You know what's also weird about this? And I don't think anyone has actually brought this up, but it's mentioned twice in the report that during the campaign he was getting Tom Schweik's donor list.
Yeah, I saw that, and I thought
What's
it was
up?
strange.
How do you
and I
get
didn't know
that?
if that was
And-
with permission or
and
not. But I
don't
saw
know.
that. I saw that.
Well,
doubt
you
it.
All
know,
right, let's move on, shall we,
actually
Alvin?
before the campaign.
I need to talk to you about John Carlos Muhammad, a member of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, who is now hoping to get a measure in front of the voters again to reverse earlier action by the St. Louis electorate, which said that eventually the Board of Aldermen is going to go from 28 members to 14. He believes, Muhammad does, that if you reduce it to 14, you will dilute the black strength in St. Louis, so he's against that. How do you feel about this? Should the board go to 14 or should it stay at 28?
I wish we'd go to 14 tomorrow. That was heralded. That passed by a large margin. North St. Louis, South St. Louis. The people want a smaller government. The 28 wards are a problem. Now, if you want to change something, let's quit making North and South wards. Let's make a ward run from the tip of the South Side to the tip of the North Side, and you represent all people, downtown, South, North. If you don't like it, don't run for office. That's how it should be handled. But this idea that we have to protect, once again, our own wards and our own turf, no. That's a cop-out. And if you're one of the 7 that has a ward, and maybe you're one of the 7 that doesn't, then that's your own fault. Win an election.
It sounds like a great idea, Alvin, but I think about the racial wars we would have in the elections if you had a white candidate appealing to the South and a black candidate appealing to the North.
Or making them have to appeal to the other.
But you have
Exactly.
to.
That's what Alan said.
Yeah.
Like I said, it sounds like a great idea.
You know, the thing is, though, if you go to New England, you'll go to some towns where they have town meeting, and like everybody in the town votes, and in some cases they have representative town meeting where they have 400 people show up and they vote. And so I've never lost sleep over 28 members of the Board of Aldermen. I know some people think it's unwieldy. I don't think it's that many.
I think it's ridiculous. First of all, it was fine when there were 850,000
That's right.
people.
Thank
you.
Now, I love that it's quaint to have small government, and frankly, it's one of the reasons we don't need 97 municipalities in St. Louis County, that everybody's got to have a government where, they're practically related to everybody on the city council. To me, it's just an absurd idea that the alderman should represent, 11,000 people. It's just ridiculous. It is unwieldy, and it may be quaint, and it may be historic, but it's dysfunctional.
I don't want to argue for it because the people voted against
we voted. They
it.
did.
But on the other hand, there is something nice about people knowing who their alderman is. In the county, most people can't name their county council person.
But I think they feel as though they're being represented in a fashion that they can deal with.
It's manageable.
It's manageable.
Right.
And I think people in the city think like, This is we're not getting anything done.
But I will say it's easier to pay off 14 people than 28 people.
Well, and the other thing is, it's as far as the county council goes, I don't think it's a question of people don't know; they don't want to know.
Well, the county doesn't have that much function. It really
don't
doesn't.
But I
wanna know.
love
Hey,
your
Bill,
idea.
I want to ask you about an organization called Stoss Landscaping Urbanism, which was given the contract for the Shoto Greenway, which is going to be a new path of bicycle and pedestrian paths connecting Forest Park to the riverfront. So they're going to call that Shoto Greenway, and a company with offices in Boston and Los Angeles is going to be in charge of the design. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel very provincial about it. I wish it was a St. Louis company. I think it's a great idea to be connecting Forest Park to the river and all these greenways and be more bicycle friendly. But it really seems to me that in St. Louis we have enough engineers or architects, whatever person's qualifications have to be, to do this without going to Boston or LA to do it for us.
New ideas, I think, come from new places and new people. I don't have a problem with it. And I think if you're talking about, green space and greenways, LA and Boston put us to shame. So how about ask some people to do it that know exactly what they're talking about? I don't have a problem with it. We've got to bust out of this shell
green
somewhere.
space in Los Angeles, a half an acre costs $1 million, it costs $1 million or more. So it's not I don't think of Los Angeles as being, I know what you're saying.
I'm with you.
I would be satisfied to see an architectural firm or an engineering firm from Kansas City, frankly. Just somebody who understands our Midwestern sensibilities.
Well, you
I
know
don't
what?
think we always
Look,
have to be
the
saying.
Arch was by Eero Saarinen. He wasn't a local, and you have
was
the Wainwright
50
Building with the guy
50
from
years ago.
Chicago, Louis Sullivan, and
that was
other
a
great
different.
buildings.
That was a different time. Those were the salad. Those were the salad
No,
days.
well, let's get back to the
Let's get
salad
back to-
days.
I think they put together what they call a jury of experts, and I'm shocked you weren't on it. I have to admit that. But
I know Greenway.
You know,
He does.
he does. He walk. He knows the park. I know. But they put an expert group of people, some local, names you might know, and others that were there for their expertise. I'm going to say that they probably gave a full. They probably looked at all the options, and they unanimously picked this.
But we
what's
always pick.
these
We're
sauce.
forever
Sauce.
trying to
How do you
sit
know that they
with
weren't
the
right?
cool kids in the cafeteria. We got plenty of cool kids here in Missouri. That's all I'm
And
saying.
there
I don't
is a
think it's-
tendency to overrate something or somebody
Because
from
it's
out
bigger.
of town.
Yeah.
I would. I'll
we
just
were
defer
always
to the
hiring people
jury,
from Boston.
okay?
But by your standards, the Arch or whatever the Jefferson Expansion Memorial was going to be would have to be done by someone from St. Louis or Kansas
maybe
City.
it would be a triangle, Charlie.
And I don't know why you would conclude Kansas
Something
City.
even better.
The circle.
All right, Alvin, Reid, I want to ask you.
Kansas City is
All right.
nothing for us. I don't know why you included Kansas City.
Alvin, this past week, the St. Louis County Council, in its wisdom, voted 5-2 to put a measure in front of the voters in November, which will raise the sales tax yet again, this time by 1/8 of a cent, this is in the county, to expand the zoo and breed wild cheetahs and that kind of stuff. So on the front page of today's paper, some wonderful cheetahs, little baby cheetahs. Do you think there was a connection? Is there some sort of public relations connection here?
Well, the cheetahs were born, I think, in November. And they're making their debut, I guess, tomorrow. And the city council voted on Tuesday. And the little kitties can be on the commercial and say, vote yes, and it's going to be so cute. But I think that's just coincidence. I think the people should have the right to vote on it. I had coffee with Donna Poe. She works for downtown Kirkwood businesses. And, I understand that sales taxes hurt retail businesses. I am not a fan of sales taxes, but I am a fan of having a chance to vote on it. I think it would be a special facility in St. Louis County. I think it will bring something to St. Louis County. And
So you don't think the cheetahs were a PR effort by the zoo to get that sales tax increased?
I think they will be part of the PR effort, but I don't think that they got mom and dad cheated together and figured out the gestation period.
Thank you,
And then
Of course, the animals are always part of the PR effort of the zoo. I find this whole thing kind of sad in that the zoo is such a revered thing in St. Louis, right next to the Muni. And I hate to vote against anything for the zoo or the Muni, but I think this new sales tax might be a bridge too far even for me. I don't think this is a good way to raise money.
Okay, anti-kitty, for kitty.
No, it just, you know.
No, I agree. You know what I would like to see, if you had the ballot language, if you could, is it possible even to have, you know, a sales tax, or would you be in favor of implementing, you know, having an admission fee? I mean, could you ever do something like that? Because
probably.
Can
You
you
could,
can
but
you
you're
put
not.
a
They're
can you
not.
put a shelf life on a sales tax? Can you say, like, all right, sales tax
Never happens.
5 years, you'll raise $8-10 million. That's your seed money. Go for it, and then we're done.
Well, we do have those. You know, they have sunset provisions,
Well,
but
well,
when
let's
you
do
get to
that.
when you get to the end of it, the voters are always told, well, for public safety reasons, we really have to continue.
Well, then the cheetahs will be grown by then. They won't be as cute
I think
anymore.
that
So we can
this-
move
They'll
on.
be running around. It's danger out there.
This should
Public
not.
safety right there.
Public safety.
They're
Right.
counting on this to be a referendum on what we think of the zoo, and we all love the zoo. That's just something everybody does. But instead of it being a referendum on whether we love the zoo, to me there are two big problems. One is the zoo does not need this money. And the reason they don't need, the evidence that they don't need this money is they're happy to have the luxury of using a 1970 tourism model that cost our city, or them, something like $10 million a year, every year. And then secondly is, I think, and this is inside baseball, and I'm not speaking for anybody, I think that there was genius in having a zoo museum district that lumped the five, well, originally four, and now the garden. So you have the zoo, the science center, the art museum, the history museum, and the garden together for the very reason you don't do this, which is to have one of the five freelancing. I think it's unfair to the other four.
The zoo certainly sees itself as a cut above.
I know they
the
do, and I
science
think that's,
industry.
I personally
But
don't
if
agree
the
with
art
that.
museum
Okay.
was going to open a new facility out in West County and they asked for money to do it, it would be separate than just the art museum downtown.
Okay.
This is a totally different thing.
Alvin, thank you. Ray, thank you. And in a moment, folks, you'll be able to call in with your comments and questions for Ray and Wendy. As Bob Cuban once said, look out for the cheetah. Don't forget, you can always write us care of KETC, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. And those letters at ketc.org, those are your emails. Hashtag Donnybrook, STL is the way you can tweet, and then Ray and Wendy will be reading those. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next week, but don't forget your turn. It's just around the corner. So don't touch that dial and don't go away.
Donnybrook is made possible through the generous support of the members of KETC.